Matriz, alternative virtual reality.
Alright everyone, hello and welcome to the Alt VR YouTube channel and to the VR and Philosophy podcast numbers... Yeah, we just checked this out. I think it's number 17. It might be number 18. I think it's number 17, and it's actually been 2.5 years since the last episode. So this is an attempt to keeping it alive, and a very warm welcome naturally to Bendik Bjørnstad, who incidentally was the first guest ever at this podcast, which then would be even farther back in time than 2.5 years ago, maybe 4 or something like that, when we actually met in VR chat to sort of discuss some philosophy stuff. But yes, we were just talking about time. Before you started here, and I mean, this podcast in general has been just mainly about we have been interested in games for a long time, MMOs, big AAA games like maybe Red Dead Redemption, things that give you an experience that you find to be meaningful, that you carry with you for the rest of your life, that becomes in some sort of way defining for who you are. There are actually games that, and we also took a look at this book, Virtual Existentialism, Meaning and Subjectivity in Virtual Worlds, and games can definitely be a way to get a new perspective on yourself, on the world, and that kind of stuff. And the potential for VR here is sort of what this podcast is about.
What VR can learn from.
Yes.
Online worlds.
Because in contrast to the general computer games industry, VR hasn't really come that far. And I mean, how do you view these things? What role has games had? What do you think the potential is? And also in VR, because you are not necessarily an everyday VR user, right?
Certainly not. No, not every day.
No.
Definitely not.
So how would things have to look for you in order to make I just feel that this is the pressing question that VR and the VR community needs to ask is, what would make sort of VR undeniable? It's the most complicated question ever. It's an unfair question because I'm asking for the VR killer app, but do you have any initial reflections on what?
Yeah, for sure. So, VR is a very promising technology in the sense that it offers a bigger scope, a bigger vision for possible entertainment worlds than computer screens can ever offer. Now, computer screens as a medium, like mouse, keyboard, monitor, that traditional 3-part setup has had since the early 90s, it's had its time, and there's been an economic incentive to generate sort of the explosion in gaming and entertainment products has sort of co-evolved and driven the evolution of the technology. Monitor screens and gaming sales and equipment stuff has definitely shaped the input devices, and because the industry has sort of catered so much to the market pressure of it, it's sort of become this intuitive flow thing that gamers access very readily. Like, you sit down and the medium is very ready to hand. It's almost like a hammer or a tool now. It's very intuitively graspable.
Yes.
The world is displayed as a screen. You project your own mental mapping onto the character. You move the camera with the mouse, you move the character with the keys. Doesn't matter if it's a third world, third person perspective, first person, it's still very intuitively graspable.
Yes, it's embodied.
Yes.
It becomes a part of you.
Yes, and the ease of access towards it is also it's designed tailored, and the generation that is now playing them, the millennials, they've grown up with it as it emerged into it, and they're also teaching their younger siblings, their younger cousins. Gen Z is also catching on to that same thing. So VR would have to have a similar kind of growth with a demographic.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because because when we were growing up, we did learn how to coexist in a way, or think with the technology, right? Because it becomes a part of you, so that you are exercising your cognitive functions, your everyday being, in a way with the technology. And for VR, maybe it's an afterthought for a lot of people. That might be the case, but there is this. I think also when you're saying this with like the imagery, or I find that sitting in front of a computer in your room, in your apartment, it's also sort of this aesthetic in a way. I'm thinking of like if you're viewing some sort of lo-fi girl animation or something on YouTube, or there is an aesthetic to being online and chilling in your apartment, kind of. There is something there, and I wonder what role that serves, because I think that the sort of entrance into that is, for instance, VR chat. VR chat has so much in common with just that kind of lo-fi girl chilling, doing homework, listening to music or whatever. It's this vibey kind of being, and I'm interested in what kind of culture will sort of make that possible. Like this, I'm very fascinated by people who sort of sleep in VR chat, for instance, and it's so understandable to me in many ways, because you go into these worlds and it's like when you open VR chat, for instance, you get this menu of what kind of worlds you want to hang out in, and a lot of them are focused on chilling in some sort of way or manner, and it's kind of the same role as a YouTube. When you open YouTube, you get all these different thumbnails, and it's about chilling in some way. But this idea of spending time
right
in virtual worlds, I think that what I'm hoping for, or what I'm what I hope might exist in some way in virtual reality, is the same thing as being it's extremely romanticized, but being 12 years old and chopping Yule or magic logs in RuneScape.
Right.
That was a form of dwelling. Like, it was I didn't feel like, oh, I have only this amount of time. I was there. This was a thing that you did. You logged in, you're chewing magic logs, and you're talking to the other people there. And it was a calm activity. It was calm and focused, and I was happy. It felt worthwhile in some sort of way. And I'm wondering, what would that be in virtual reality? The closest thing I've been has been VR chat, because it's just nice.
Yeah.
But the problem I think that VR has is that, to a certain extent, it's not as physically comfortable. Like, if I'm in a sleep world, if I actually get really sleepy, I might like to take my headset off. Like, I don't know, there's just I think that VR chat, people who use VR chat a lot, is the closest thing to those who are comfortably cutting magic logs in RuneScape and some sort of happy with their grind. But yeah,
right.
how do you feel like? I know that you're interested in World of Warcraft, for instance, and they were the original OG MMO, which really had a. Of course, I mean, I don't need to take dissing EverQuest or something like that, but still, World of Warcraft was the monumental. When it came, it absolutely crushed everything.
It put the MMO on the market for a lot of people. Yes, 100%. Yes.
And what was their trick? What did they do the right way? What was the reason that it was just this fun place, this lively, dynamic?
Right. What caused the appeal?
Yes.
Right. I think, it's a big question. We could spend hours on it, and I do on my channel. Check me out.
Yes, but unitary designation.
Right.
Asking the real questions.
Right. But I think what their trick was that they got a lot of things. They got a lot of basic things right. So like, they didn't just have some kind of one-hit formula thing that they sort of found or something.
Right.
What they did was that they had a lot of systems that they already existed in other MMOs, stuff like trading, stuff like character progression, stuff like a social sphere, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And they just did all those things well. Because Blizzard at the time was a quality game developer. Like, they didn't have to rush products, they had capital to make something polished and finished. And they also had, strong RPG sort of backgrounds. They were all huge nerds. They liked Lord of the Rings, they liked Baldur's Gate, they liked Dungeons and Dragons, and just a bunch of nerds who just spent time making these like archetypal, appealable fantasy tropes, and then just game systems that worked, intuitive talents. Like, nothing was fancy or overblown or hyped. They just all worked. And Blizzard never intended for that to be the thing it became. Like, they didn't have servers. Like, they had to double their server status every month, like for 12 months consecutively.
Yes, it went far too well.
Exactly. Yeah. They anticipated something like Warcraft 2 box sales to be like the figure, like 300,000 people or something.
Yes.
And millions were pouring in.
Yes.
Like, they completely did not anticipate the appeal of it. And I think it was just culture was just ready for that kind of they were ready for a chat space that also happened to be a great game as well. Something like Second Life or these kinds of more socially oriented chat spaces.
It's interesting now that I think of it that when was the peak of World of Warcraft?
2009. 12 million concurrent users.
Yeah. It's basically, it's pretty much around the same time as social media became huge.
Yeah, I would say. It was a brief moment in time where Facebook and World of Warcraft was both cool. A glorious shining bastion of 2009.
Yeah, things are a bit different now.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Yeah. I'm not too updated on sort of the latest development in terms of MMOs in VR. I did read about some sort of MMO that was this failure recently, but I don't know about Zenith, which I think was one of them. I haven't really tried it out, and the reason for that, for my part, is that, and this is, I guess, a critique. It's not necessarily a critique of virtual reality, but in a lot of MMOs you might have some grinding, and I mean I'm not going to fucking level up mining using my physical hands in a VR MMO, right?
Right.
There has to be some things are a bit different. Like I will accept the occasional grind, like me and you we are playing Elder Scrolls Online. Mm-hmm. At least somewhat.
Yeah, it's a good game.
Yeah. We try to at least play once every week.
Gold Road coming out.
Together, yeah.
Just to date this immediately.
I mean, I like it, but there are some grinds.
For sure.
And to a certain extent, this is fine. It's also part of what makes the game fun, because you get this, now I've worked for a while, now I get to enjoy this kind of thing that I did work for.
Those damn lore books.
Yes.
Right.
Right. And to a certain extent, it also gets problematic when you are sick of it. And the grinds, I'm just not sure how that would work in VR, but yeah, maybe one day. I'm just curious how things will work out, because you do also have this. I wonder if you can expand on this, but honor systems, and I mean, you have, to a certain extent, you can be the shit in World of Warcraft or in some other
player activity.
Yes, for instance, maybe there to be dominating in that respect. A PvP in VR sounds
intense. Isn't there that shooter game?
Sounds quite intense. There is Pavlov, which I think has a quite a good player base, and that becomes quite similar to Counter-Strike, right?
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, Pavlov was good. Also, Beat Saber has a very competitive high-end scene, right? High score.
Yes, yeah. I actually played some Beat Saber today.
Oh, nice.
I'm just playing like Lady Gaga.
What's your ELO rating?
I'm feeling very... I won't say. But there is this... Yeah. I wonder how everything sort of will pan out in terms of honor. Just in VR chat, you would have these different user rankings, right? Which is good. It will serve some sort of... If you're just this... terrible person who's going around harassing people.
Oh, you mean when you say honor, you mean a kind of reputation based?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how that will pan out, because humans will be humans, right? So there will be some sort of social hierarchy. That always tends to happen.
You're talking about a theoretical virtual MMO or a virtual space like VR chat.
Yes.
What could it learn from MMOs? What would it have to incorporate? What would it have to do differently?
Yes.
Right, and how would you keep track of a person's hierarchical standing in this world? Like,
yeah,
how would you attain something?
Yeah, or how would they be motivated by that? Maybe that has some negative influences as well, right? When people are in positions to exert power over other people.
Yeah.
Moderation is always difficult, but...
In New World, players can become the mayor of towns and charge like tax rates to other players for having buildings in the town.
Right.
And you know, the mayor is usually the best PvPer, or he's voted for, but it's also skill based.
What game was that?
New World, Amazon.
Oh, it's New World.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
so you can become the Jeff Bezos
of a town and set the interest rates to 100% and just tax everyone. Yeah. It's you'd be voted out, but in theory you could. Yeah. So how does a player, like, because you want a system that encourages players to invest effort into the game world.
Yes.
And you
exactly.
want to make sure that can be balanced in a way that isn't detrimental or destructive to other players' enjoyment of the world.
Yeah.
So how could you do that in the VR space? Well, partly what you could do is you would have to have some kind of activity that wasn't just pro-social, like there wasn't just meeting friends in metaverse-like avatars and communicating. Like you would have some kind of... the good thing about these online game worlds is that there are games, like they're actually well-designed.
Right.
Game worlds.
That's a good point.
Right.
Yeah, I think in games that helps a lot, because there are very clear, you do this and you're winning, this is the rules of actually carrying out the game and so on. So I think also that platforms like VRChat, they are doing this in quite a nice way. There is just no way of actually sort of releasing something that is lively, like most people don't want too many rules, and that's fine.
Right.
But you also sort of have to admit that there isn't a need for some sort of moderation, unless you're really accepting at the fundamental level that whatever can happen. It's like in VR chat. I was there the other day, and I don't even know how to describe it, because I don't want to make it too humoristic, but I don't want to describe it as not being devoid of any form of humor because it's just so weird. But I was in VR chat the other day, and I don't think like nudity. You're not allowed to have nude avatars, right? That like you can't just walk around with an avatar with a penis.
Right.
Of course, they are. You're basically seeing everything except for that with most people's avatars.
Right.
In VR chat, like.
Just Ken dolls walking around, nothing in the crotch area.
Yeah, there will be some sort of symbolic cover up,
right,
in some way. But I did see, just spending time in the avatar world, this person who suddenly clicked a button and there was then nothing covering up, this avatar had a penis,
right.
And there was some person spawning into this world who sort of didn't really seem to move that much, and then this person will literally like position themselves so that their virtual penis is in the direction or the head direction of their eyes to this avatar that just spawned in the world.
Right, so the first thing you see is right.
Yes. And that's not cool, right?
No, it seems destructive.
And it's also not the same as being raped in real life. There is a difference there,
right?
But it's clearly trespassing of personal boundaries and something that you would not like a service to have. You don't want people to be able to do that.
Yeah, you don't want your kids logging in.
No, and of course, and if you're a parent and you're letting your children into VR chat, then at least if you knew better, then you're a fucking psycho, because that's an insane thing to do. It is.
A lot of parents are very naive and gullible as to the nature of these online spaces, for sure.
Yes. But it's this... These kind of platforms really do have the potential of that kind of stuff, and it's also... there's this famous paper, it's like from the 90s, which described the first sort of virtual world rape, and it was in a text-based game that was hacked.
Interesting.
So I think that this initial rape basically was that someone just hacked the game and wrote sentences about this character did XYZ to this character.
Right.
But since that was within the game, the reality or the way that events within this game was expressed, then the game itself spitting out these sentences about X did Y to Z.
Exactly, right.
Happened. And when people are growing up, and you mentioned this, and I think that's a really, really good and interesting point, that maybe what we may be missing with immersive VR is a generation that's actually growing up with it. They're defining their practices in relation to the medium as they grow up with it, and it actually becomes native to them in a sense.
And the technology also shifts with that demographic, because it's a market-driven approach. Like, the good thing about gaming as an industry is that it was full of nerds, full of passionate designers who just wanted to make fun experiences. And the technology was so, versatile as it came up, that sometimes the game developers literally pushed the envelope. Like they had to ask chip processors, manufacturers, Intel, to make specific chips for stuff.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot with the gaming consoles of the 80s and the 90s, as the NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, made way to the 16-bit Super Nintendo Entertainment System. All kinds of new games were allowed, right? So the artists and the technology were both pushing the medium, and the consumers, the market was rewarding what worked, what didn't work, right? So it was a very rapid selection process. And we're sort of at the tail end of a 40-year-old sort of like intense innovational process. So if you want to compete with that, because VR, let me just say this to your audience off the bat, I believe that in 40 years, VR or some kind of virtual mediated medium will be the de facto. Like, only boomers like myself will be sitting at the old folks home watching, physical monitors and being like, back in my days. And everyone and their mother will be using VR as a medium. I believe the headsets will be significantly different. I believe the interfacing. But what's important is that the technology goes through that same kind of selection thing. Like they let the market select what kind of preferences they want.
Yes. Yeah, and things take time. I guess that's also sort of a part of that point, right?
Yeah.
And we do remember this. I mean, I'm using VR a little bit more these days than I used to. Just casually, like earlier today, I just want to, I'll just spin up something and play something. But a lot of the reason, a lot of the reason is the form factor, right?
Right.
Like this is, it's quite small.
It's very neat. It's very neat.
And that helps. But I think that, I mean, these are exciting days, especially with Apple.
Right.
Sort of coming on in just a couple of weeks. I'm just excited about, like, I don't think that Apple is going to be the solution in terms of the vision that is being sort of portrayed here, but VR as a concept is so undeniable, and I think that when people actually do get that headset on their head, I think it might just push it beyond a certain level that it's like, oh, okay. For me, the first time I ever tried an HTC Vive, it was undeniable. The concept was undeniable. I think that the Apple Vision Pro might make it sort of viable beyond the novelty effect. Because when you do put on a VR headset the first time, you're like, okay, this is amazing. When you get a VR headset for the first time, you find out, like, as with every other thing, as with when you're buying a drone, when you're buying any other thing, it's like, this was fun for 2 hours, and then it's like, I'm not exactly sure just the way it's going to fit into my everyday.
Right. But you could say the same thing about a stationary computer in 97.
It's a good point.
Like, I bought my first stationary roughly around that time. I was 12 or 13. And it was so cool. I could move my mouse, I could sit and watch a desktop, I could launch folders, I could do all that stuff. But 2 hours later, the novelty was gone. But I had games to install on this computer, which significantly increased the enjoyment potential.
Yes, and that is the question, right? What kind of thing just would you like to do in VR?
Right.
I mean, even a worse question sort of to ask is that, because I like the point that you are making, that it is something that pertains to really every medium. Like if you're getting a new phone, like, oh, I can download all these apps. Like, okay, but what do you really want to do?
Right.
What do you really want to do? And yeah, it's surprisingly sort of few activities in the kind of spoiled, because these questions are asked within the context of the fact that we are being spoiled,
right,
with a lot of entertainment. There are a lot of movies we can watch, there are a lot of series we can watch.
Yes, too many.
Yes, so what would you like to do? Like, what kind of... I was making a video the other day about the Apple Vision Pro.
Yes.
And my complaint there was that when they were showing the different things that you could do with this device, it was usually just that you could have an iPad app in there, and an iPad app there, and an iPad app there, and you could have an iPad app there, and you could watch Disney movies there, and with some fancy stuff around your screen.
Yeah, it's very seamless. Like
Yes.
It integrates current market rewarding things into a VR thing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And that's extremely smart in a way, because they take what actually works. They know that people like to watch movies. They know that people like to, like, you could probably have GarageBand as I'm having here, right? I could have that on my Vision Pro because it's the same processor and stuff. But I was complaining that I thought it was so extremely depressing to see the sort of largest company in the whole wide world with the best VR hardware in the whole wide world not really even able to show something experimental or alternative or
Push
more
the
far. Yeah. There was no attempt to push anything. There was no adventure. You didn't have Apple Vision Pro as a means of telling some sort of hero's journey story where you
right.
slayed the dragon and you know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And is this maybe it's just that is probably just what we need, right?
Right.
We need someone to just sell VR that actually works. So I don't mean to really criticize Apple too much. I might just be criticizing my own sort of leaning towards over romanticization of the VR medium, right? You want it to be this mysterious be all end all thing that will solve all your problems in terms of excitement and relaxing and chilling, so that VR just becomes this category that you're placing your idea of heaven within.
Right.
And you don't like when people pragmatically break it down to something that's actually usable, right?
True.
That is
true.
sort of how I would criticize my own perspective. But
Right.
then again, I feel that it is worthy to try to sort of retain this idea that VR could be something.
Yeah, the promise of technology, right?
Right.
Right. The fantastic visions of future worlds. I don't want to critique Apple too much because sometimes getting the basics right it's hard. I mean,
Yes.
we all work for, companies, and we all know how hard it is to get, just everyday stuff right. But
Too true.
right, but Steve Jobs was known for pushing visions, and I believe he would have shared your more romantic. He would have enjoyed the potential of VR to push something in addition to getting the basics right.
Mhm.
Because the engineers over there at Apple they've never struggled with basics, like it's always been, they have the funding to get stuff right, so why didn't they have some kind of creative vision that 5% extra, or this little app in the corner that was something new that they wanted to try. Maybe that's to come, one can hope.
Yeah, and it is also worth, of course, to mention that they never really discussed virtual reality as a term. It was always augmented reality. So their vision for
Is
the
that a
whole
cop-out,
thing.
do you think?
No. I think it's. I mean, people have to have different roles as well, right?
Right.
So it's nice to have the industry giant sort of do it the right way, and then you will always have these smaller actors that are trying to do it differently. But yeah, I just, a lot of people misunderstood my take on Apple because it's not like I think it will be the shit. I actually think that things are going to sort of start a bit for VR now. I mean, we did call 2016 the year of VR because a lot of actors like Oculus and HTC Vive and PlayStation VR released their first really sort of genuine head-mounted displays. But I think that when people do try the Apple Vision Pro, things are going to become okay.
Right.
I know that I can't afford this, but I see now that this is going to work in the future.
Yeah, I think my parents would even be within the demographics of people who might be interested in something like the Apple Vision
Yeah,
Pro.
right.
And that's a broad appeal for, it's a wide age range that fits into this product. The only gateway is the pricing.
Yes, and the pricing is, I think it's like $3,600 or $3,500.
Right.
In Norway, we have a lot of import duties and whatever, so it becomes expensive as fuck. But
The point is that the medium itself isn't prohibitory in any way. It's really just a pricing issue.
yes, and if you do think about it, if it does really become, has this ability to reshape your surroundings in this way, in this standalone manner,
Right.
Laptops do cost up towards that price at least.
Yeah, and if you throw in a TV as well.
Exactly, right? Because you do have monitors for your stuff.
Yeah.
So if you give that
With Apple Vision Pro, you have
4
your
or 5
TV.
iterations
Yeah.
down the line,
For sure.
and maybe
And
your
cheaper knockoffs.
yes, not least I'm really excited about what the different studios are going to learn about their lenses, for instance.
Yeah.
But if you can turn a little studio apartment into a sort of mansion in a way,
Right.
where you have a nice view, you have your TV there, you have your own cinema there, and it's like that was an addition of $4,000,
Right. Yeah, you know these.
whereas another apartment would have cost like 200,000 more. You know.
Right. No, but you're right. You know these. There's a large demographics now of Chinese young businessmen who live in these very shitty apartments, like very small, very confined, and they do the bare minimum. Like there's a whole kind of like a Japanese grass eater movement just happening in China. It's a big sort of cultural thing happening.
How do you
in
mean
China.
Japanese grass eater movement?
So there's been a movement in Japan for males to opt out of traditional societal things. They're called-
That I've heard.
Right, they're called grass eaters.
Okay.
They don't partake in anything. The same thing is happening in China to a lesser extent. Like these, you know, China had the one-child policy. And
Yes.
most of them were mostly male, right? And so these males, they're educated. Like China's doing well on that front. They have their own apartments, but they're usually very small apartments, and there's not a lot happening in their lives. Like they do the bare minimum at work, then they come home, then they play video games, right? These VR headsets, you know, affordable. Suddenly, your small confined apartment is this kind of mind palace. You know, there's an extreme market for that, and it's not just places like China too, but places where infrastructure might be missing. You know, sub-Saharan Africa. Suddenly, you have this VR world that you can access. There's a lot of potential there. There's a lot of
That's
markets.
extremely interesting.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Hold that thought.
Sure.
Okay, yes. So you're explaining how these Japanese or Chinese men sort of live this lifestyle with. Is it in any way connected to some sort of frugality?
Part of it is definitely an economic issue, but also there's just sort of this, the meaning sort of problem we have in the West. It's also it's a global thing. Like,
Of course.
people are disenfranchised and alienated from, you know, their lives and society in general, and yet these online worlds are these social media spaces and these gaming online worlds. Like the MMO scene in Asia is actually rather huge. They have a lot of games that we haven't heard of, and a lot of games we have heard of, like Lost Ark, and yeah. So gaming is big in Asia, in Korea, in China, and in Japan.
Yes, and it also then becomes big in. It's not just something that you are doing between 18 and 20 o'clock.
No.
It's your spare time. You're logging off, you're going off work, and you're entering another virtual world. You're embodied as another person, you're a certain character.
Yeah, you're going home to a very sterile apartment, very meager means, but you have this online world where you can live out the hero's journey, right? The real world fails to provide it for you. So there's a market there for VR to sort of offer these kinds of experiences.
Yes. And then the question is, to what extent do you think that this is a positive development or negative development, or is that a dichotomy that is not necessarily sustainable, or that doesn't bring anything to the table? Is it okay to discuss it in terms of that? Like, some people are having a productive relationship to virtuality in that manner, and some might have a detrimental relationship to it. Is it more complex than that?
I think it depends a lot on who you ask, and there's a lot of big questions in there that gets to philosophy and economics and, you know, theology in a certain sense, at least ethics.
Yes.
So I think humans are, if anything, they are adaptable. Humans have always found ways to thrive in shifting environments, and this sort of push to online worlds to escape the unsatisfactoriness of the real world. You know, it's tantamount to seeking out new environments when the old one became unfertile. Or
Right. Yes. Yeah. Maybe it's a sort of a migration, in a way, that people are able to actually do by themselves, right? So we are not necessarily. I'm not moving to another city because I'm looking for food, but I am scouring VR applications to sort of satisfy my more spiritual sense of or need of belonging, maybe of being a particular person, having an identity, and often these things are, as most projects, as even most jobs, as most things that we do, they are an attempt to, yeah, I mean, things are different, right? Before, most likely, I mean, it's also interesting to discuss these things because, okay, we have been alive for what, 30 years? We don't know how things were before. We don't know actually how people found meaning in their life. It's typical to say that, well, previously people were living more in tribes. It was more like a family thing. You can read from stories that maybe what you did for a living wasn't really that important before because people were just when industry started to happen, it was like, well, we are having a job. You would be, yes, I'm also working for my country, for society, for things to go around, when that was kind of new, for instance. And even way before that, well, you would of course be either working with gathering stuff or hunting stuff or working at the farm, or that things would be simpler in terms of being, in terms of identity. And I think it's challenging sometimes to know exactly whether that critique is sort of right or not, but I do think it's likely that we do have this identity crisis now.
Yeah, meaning crisis, identity crisis, sure.
Yeah, because the jobs that we do may be too abstract. It's not necessarily easy to point to, this is what I'm doing and this is how it turns into food and this is why I'm proud of my work. You might be part of this big cog in a little thing, and it can sometimes be just hard to know who you are. And there, these virtual worlds might come to a rescue, because you can be that guy in the virtual world, because things are easier to sort of be. But do you think that this actually the solution to the problem of being? Who are we to be? What are we to spend our lives on? Do you think that it's a net positive, this opportunity? And if so, is that dependent on how we do it? Or do you have it's a big question.
Right. Well, I think partly usually in history, there were modes of being, modes of interacting with the world that were maladaptive, like they didn't work, right? Like if you didn't hunt, you didn't get food, but the consequences were existential.
Yes.
There would be there was a limit case for how wrong you could get the answers to the questions of life. But we've sort of solved, and that kind of limit case kept us inside a working mode of being, right? And the consequences of getting it wrong was life or death. But we've somewhat solved that problem now. There's, at least in European states, there's a safety net, social safety net system. You're unlikely to, barring serious drug and alcohol abuse, you're unlikely to mess up existence to the extent that you will perish from it.
Yes.
So if virtual worlds is the, quote, right answer to the meaning crisis, there won't be a life or death corrective mechanism.
Right.
So like, let's take this no-named Belgian man. He isn't satisfied with his work. He hasn't established a meaningful relationship with a romantic partner, and he hasn't created his own family. He has these virtual avatars that he lives out his identities through, and he goes through his life like that. Now, it's not better, I guess, than doing it in the quote-unquote real world, but it's also not, like, nothing, no structure of sustenance is corroded or destroyed. So it's also like, it gets into what vision do you have for how future human societies should be structured. Does this vision of this guy living out his hero's journeys online, does it strike you as wrong, right? Because you have this innate sense of it shouldn't be like that. And if so, that's something to like reflect on personally.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because we might have this. I mean, that is the philosophical experiment of Nozick, right, and the experience machine, which he sort of introduced, where the idea was that if you would plug into the experience machine, which was this hypothetical VR machine that would just give you pleasure for the rest of your life, his point was that if people, when they were answered this, or when they were asked whether they would want to plug into the experience machine and then answered no, then he meant that to be sort of a point that, well, clearly people are they're interested in more than just pleasure. So it was for him an argument against hedonism, right? But it's also very interesting to sort of criticize the criticism of hedonism in a way. That, okay, if someone is living their best life through virtual worlds in VR chat,
right,
why do we have to view that as a lesser thing? Maybe if you do have that idea, then you need to go back into yourself and figure out, but why are you evaluating that as sort of not being up to the natural standard?
Sure, I mean, yeah, but it's also important to point out that these hedonistic, like, these virtual worlds aren't hedonistic. Like, a lot of the things you do in these virtual worlds are repetitive, grinding. They simulate real world scenarios. They simulate worthwhile pursuits. Like, you're constantly working for your next goal in this sort of gaming thing. Like, you have this title now, sure, you have this attainment in a hierarchy, but you want the bigger title, you want the cooler mount, or what have you. You want to demonstrate some form of increased competence. So it simulates the kind of opportunities that we would want the real world to offer us. Human beings thrive on growth and, you know,
yes,
self-expression
and challenges.
Yeah, and it's also a pro-social thing. Like, you can only do these things if other people join this social world. It's not a solipsistic kind of pursuit. This Belgian man wouldn't go into his apartment and chase hedonistic visions. He would chase his ambition, his pursuit, his competitive drive, but he just wouldn't have anywhere he wouldn't find anywhere in the real world for it. There's a meaning crisis. So he finds it online with other people in shared pursuits.
Yes, that's a very good point. That it's not necessarily about plugging into pleasure. In many ways, MMOs and these kind of games, they have actually understood in a deeper way that it's not like you're clicking play and then you're getting a massage.
Right.
You're clicking play and then you're hiking.
Yeah, hunter-gathering simulator.
Yeah. And then you get in 2 hours, then you get to the reward because you've actually been, and so they do simulate the means to actually generate a feeling of well-being, of satisfaction, in a way that is in many ways emulating struggle and challenge.
The biggest thing they sell is this false sense of productivity.
Yeah.
You feel like you've done something worthwhile and like value generational. Almost. You feel like you've done something that's productive for other people, which you haven't. I mean, unless other people admire your character's level.
Not necessarily, at least.
Right, but you feel like because you've been trading, you've been farming materials, you've been selling them, you've been accumulating your wealth, like you've been doing all these things that your brain is telling you, like, yes, you've done all this stuff, and we're not sophisticated enough to the brain lets itself be fooled into thinking it's done real stuff, and it gives all the endorphins or opioids that it would reward real attainment with.
Yes.
So in that sense, they are like pleasure, like they're very sophisticated hedonistic machines because they actually satisfy attainment in real world.
Yeah. No, it's true, and I was thinking about, because people do go into these things quite heavily. Like I was in VR chat the other day, and I was checking out this club, a nightclub, and there were people working there, as guards in front of the doors, and they were checking your ID in a way, and it was just so absurd but also funny because they were taking it so seriously, and it's fun to take things seriously. It's fun to play in that role-playing manner, but there was basically a queue. I was in a queue, there was 10 people in front of me, and they were going to check your ID, and they were just like asking you how old were you, and then after the follow-up question, when were you born? And a guy in front of my queue, he was like, how old are you? I'm 28. Okay, when were you born? And he was like, and he failed to do the math.
Right.
Probably. Sorry man, you're out. It's not personal. It's just our policy. Please step in the back of the queue, sir. Please. And it was just I had to turn off my mic because I was just laughing because they were taking it so seriously. It was super fun, right? And this role playing is also something that it's nice because you can really pretend. I mean, I think it's really healthy every once in a while to get out of your own skin, right? If you could cease to be yourself for at least one day a month to really lose it, it seems healthy in a way, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it's good to do that all day, every day,
right.
Because sometimes you might have to go to the shop and buy some stuff, and if you're not comfortable in your own skin, that seems like a habit that isn't good to good to enforce.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you can mask other mental illnesses with this constant escapism. Yeah, for sure.
But they have had that in MMOs for a long time, right? The different servers for those who really go into it.
Role-playing servers.
With role-playing in another way. And it's interesting because just playing an MMO in general is a certain kind of role-playing, right?
Yeah, I mean,
but then when you're role-playing, then you are your character also in the chat.
Right.
I guess, right?
Yes.
It's different grades of synchronizing with your in-game character.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, when we are playing Elder Scrolls Online, I like my Dragon Knight character or whatever.
Right.
And I take care to present that character in a certain light, like how it looks and whatever. But when I'm talking with you on Discord when we're playing, then I'm myself. I don't need to
speak as the Dragon Knight, right.
Then it becomes a bit weird to me.
Sure, but if you wanted to do that, you would also play the character differently in game. Like you wouldn't run around randomly to objectives. You would toggle walking mode.
Yeah, so it's a completely different inretning, Norwegian word.
Yeah, like
it's a different
goal,
comportment
right,
towards whatever the game even is, right?
Yeah, and role-playing servers are specifically made for, I mean, in any game, made for the community to roleplay as their characters of choice. Like the goal of a generalized MMO server would be to encounter these bosses in these raids, right? Do the classical hero's journey. Go into the dragon's den, go down, slay the dragon, collect the loot, return having changed, right? But the role-playing servers have a different structure. Like they're specifically, their goal as a community is to create memorable events.
Yes.
Everyone commits to their role, And then there's a hierarchy of social strata, and it's optional. Like it's people support this character on top because he or she is really great at role playing as this kind of power mad kind of mayor or what have you, right? So it's a pro-social cooperative endeavor. The villains are all like out of character OOC. They're all, you know, they talk OOC with each other, like, yeah, I'm gonna do this to, and they have these scripts that they follow. It's quite sophisticated actually, and you know, there's different degrees of pathology involved as well, right? Like different ways that role playing can be used. Some people can escape. Some people can have that as a hobby. They come home from work, they role play with friends, they create these memorable experiences, like they went out camping or you know, what have you, right?
Yeah.
It's up to them to find meaning in that kind of endeavor. So yeah, I don't really mind role playing, and I think VR can be a great medium for it because of the immersion that it offers. Right?
Absolutely, right. In terms of representation, that you can just don different avatars
Right.
in order to serve this or that purpose. I'm wondering when we will get. I mean, in terms of role playing, right? You would also have Dungeons and Dragons, and you know, maybe Baldur's Gate. The next Baldur's Gate
Will be in VR for sure. Yeah,
that you could actually run it in VR, right? Would be pretty cool.
that would be cool.
I mean, imagine this perfect, and I'm just to be clear, I'm no Dungeons and Dragons expert by any means. I do work with some people that are interested in it, so I'm having my eye on it. I think it seems interesting. I want us to try it. We do also have some neighbors that are running some D&D sessions sometimes. It would be cool to try out.
That would be cool for sure. Yeah.
But I mean, in VR, that's a potential. Like, even just think of how you could have a computer's software program for planning. Like if you are the dungeon master,
Right.
and you can sort of plan the different maps or whatever. You can have a generator with some random elements, and you can place this, and you get the story already there.
Right.
And you could place like, you know, this is going to happen, and the dungeon master could sort of plan this,
Yes.
the world in beforehand, and then allow everyone. Okay.
It was fortunate that it hit your hand. Did it hurt?
Well,
Did it break?
so this thing did not land on my computer.
It didn't break either. That's great.
Okay, I can just show you here. We have an evil cat. You see there? There's the evil cat. He's throwing the statues down. Okay. It's not good. I'll just take this. Anyways, I just think it would be really, really cool with that kind of... That's the kind of thing I want to see in VR.
Right.
Some sort of sustained practice that once a month you would get everyone gathered into some sort of D&D practice. That would be this great way of adventuring.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It would also be this sort of thing that I would think is missing from Apple. Like, if you do have VR, you have to be able to go to adventures with your friends.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. For sure. For sure.
We are also...
Yeah, you have to offer a call to adventure. I mean, Apple might not necessarily conceptualize their task as that. Like, they're certainly offering a very sophisticated medium for entertainment, but part of the novelty of it is this call to adventure, call to a new sense of, like, what is this technology, what is the potential of this space, you know?
Yes.
And yeah, if you just meet that potential with these, you know, same old tried and tested solutions, you end up losing a lot of potential that the novelty of the medium has.
Yes, I think so. And we do have quite a good example of this. We have started reading this book. I can show it here. It's Hyper Reality, The Art of Designing Impossible Experiences. So this is a book by Curtis Hickman, and he had this, I think it was in Texas, the void. Basically, they would have these giant halls, and you would maybe enter, you and 5 friends. They would strap on a PC on your backpack and a VR headset, and then you would go into this hall, basically. There would be heat and cold, and they would move you up with elevators and spray things in your face. There would be actors around you that were tracked in virtual reality that would play as characters in your adventure. So you would maybe be in a Ghostbuster experience or some sort of very curated experience, extremely adventurous, that would be pretty much impossible to sort of deliver to a consumer without, you wouldn't be able to sort of have that kind of stuff in your living room. And that's awesome, and it's the kind of experiences that satisfy my sort of criterion for, yes, this is experimental enough, this is alternative enough, this is pushing the boundaries enough. But it's also something that you just can't do without a team of like people or whatever. And yeah.
Yeah, and a firm belief in the vision. You know, not to keep nagging on Apple, but you know, like, you need one central visionary, idea, some kind of pathfinder, director kind of figure to stake out a course and say, yes, with this new product, we're going to take this risk and, you know, get on it.
Yeah, I still think that in many ways the the simplest vision has been the one of VR chat.
Right.
It's just so genius in the sense that you can upload environments using Unity. You can also upload avatars using Unity.
Right.
You actually have a platform where people can upload anything they want, pretty much to a certain extent, and that's that. By just sort of at the bottom of the concept of whatever you're introducing, such as VR chat, you're offering full creativity. You are just the platform, that's it. Everything will be shaped after that. Then you will have a lot of shit worlds, and then you will get the really great worlds as well.
Yeah, in my experience, the best worlds are curated ones. Like Starfield showed that the AI generation model doesn't necessarily work. Like, you can tell as an inhabitant of the world, as a player in the world, that they've been crafted by people with intentions. There's much like you would structure a movie script to subtly induce certain states. You're also designing these online worlds to induce certain things. Like it feels differently to be in a zone than another zone.
Yes.
And an early level zone has a friendlier feel to it than the higher level zones. And all these things are curated. Like you'll encounter forests and lakes and, you know, kind of peaceful, serene areas to the start. You end up in, you know, lava filled, you know, mountain ranges and towards the end. And all that stuff isn't just random. It appeals to this fantasy of continual growth. Like the farm boy goes out into adventure, slays the dragon in the lair, and all that stuff. It's all the hero's journey loops all the way down.
Yes,
are contained in, and maybe human psychology and more broadly works like that. It's speculative to say, but yeah, there's a risk in losing sight of that if you're a profit-seeking entity, because people, they buy that, they gravitate towards that. Role-playing shows that. I don't know if you know the Grand Theft Auto 5 online role-playing community.
No, I don't know too much about that.
Okay, there's this big streamer S-Fan who's like does a lot of that, and yeah, they just walk around in Grand Theft Auto 5 online world. He role-plays as a sheriff. Like, he just walks around like, what seems to be the problem here, miss? And people, like, there's a whole community of it. Like, thousands of people just playing out these alternate identities, these alternate versions of themselves that the real world can't. Like, nobody, I hope, is saying that the real world should offer everyone a chance to play out every identity fantasy they've ever had.
Right. No.
That would be excessive. That's why we have role playing. But it's also become the case that the real world fails to offer people any worthwhile identity. In which case, finding them online might not be a good thing, but it is an expected thing. Because the need for...
Yes, the need is real.
The need for a rewarding identity is always real, yeah.
Yeah.
It was tied to our survival. Like, being a useful, valued member of a 100-person tribe that was how you didn't die. And so, yes, when we don't have that, we feel completely lost.
Yeah, because that need is so central, just to know who you are in the...
Yeah, to fight chaos, essentially.
Yeah.
Establish cognitive order. You need to feel valuable, productive, like you understand your situations, your circumstances. And yeah, living outside of that is, it's very discomforting. It's chief tenet of existentialism is dealing with that sense that the modern world induces.
Yes. I think I want to end on sort of problematizing it a bit further, but you mentioned earlier, and I wrote it down, that there is an economy in this thing, and there are a lot of forces that are dragging things along, right? And this was when we were talking about the more PC format of things.
Yes.
But I was sort of reminded just of how are we to protect nice things, right? This is why we can't have nice things, which is usually that things get too capitalistic and greedy.
Yeah.
And then we get the medium, for instance, World of Warcraft, right? Mm-hmm. Which had its glory days, and then things sort of took a turn for the worse. And why do these things happen? And how can we stop them? It just seems like, for instance, we also like Reddit, right?
Mm-hmm.
These days we're experiencing that Reddit is becoming shit because it's being bought, and usually these things always go to hell.
Right.
And I would like, for instance, VRChat to not go to hell.
Right.
And that it's not in hell yet, because it's still very young and there are not a lot of people in VR. But give it 10 years and we'll see how big social VR becomes, and then suddenly your VRChat character is basically being bought,
right,
by some sort of giant entity, and something that you are caring about extremely much personally. It's like these things should be sort of possible to evaluate beforehand, before you are investing your time and becoming fused with a digital identity.
Right. How do you protect the thousands or hundreds of hours you put into an avatar from corporate?
Yes, and we know that we need capitalism and that kind of money structure system to even make these games at all, because they have to be an investment.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a big problem, right?
It is. I mean, innovation and a market is a great the market is a great engine for innovation, right? Because people like cool stuff, and they will pay their hard-earned money on cool stuff. So when something becomes cool, like World of Warcraft or what have you, the problem is that greed is it's a good motivating force to get you into a generative state. Like, you want to accumulate wealth, so you create cool stuff and people reward you for it. But with a shareholder, like, people come in to a cool thing like World of Warcraft, and they start milking it for coolness, if that makes sense. Like, they start worrying about stuff like engagement metrics. Like, instead of people enjoying their time in the game and then going off and doing something else, the metric becomes how many hours do they spend, and look at these fancy big data solutions to force engagement. People aren't necessarily enjoying it anymore, they're quitting in droves. But okay, that's fine, you can add in microtransactions, cosmetics that can be bought. And the whales, like the larger economic players, the players who have a higher earnings, can spend a proportionate amount of their paycheck on these, impossible to attain consumables. Like, they can ride around on fabulous steeds and stuff, and it's not cool, but they're paying for essentially a form of coolness.
Yes.
And it just devalues the products. I mean, these are all subjects that are separate. Bless you. These are all separate videos in themselves, right? The question of how to protect coolness from capital.
Right. Of course, yes. It's an impossible question.
Yeah, but it's an important one to keep in mind when you're discussing a broader outline of how can future VR virtual worlds, what would they look like? How could they happen? And yes, how can they protect themselves from deterioration caused by lack of innovation? And it's a real question, for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, with VR chat now, for instance, they have this. They do have some sort of form of monetization. So they have, I think you can pay $10 a month.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with making money. Can I take him down?
Yeah, I think he might need some help because we put up that.
Hey, buddy. It's okay.
Can't say. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with.
No. Of course not. Of course not. And they do need to be able to make money in a way that is sustainable. So I'm actually paying right now for VR chat,
right.
Not necessarily because what they're offering me for those $10 a month is worth it. It's like, oh, you can go from 50 to 500 favorite avatars or whatever. Maybe they even should be more greedy with the way they have that system. But I'm just happy that there is a way to support them. Sometimes that is all you want, right? Like with Meta, for instance, they don't have a way for you to actually pay them.
Interesting. They extract all the monetization from metadata use.
Yeah, right. So then it's better that they are at least saying, hey, you can pay us for this service.
Yeah.
That's nice. So I like that.
What's the saying? If you
They also have a merch store, VR chat. So if
right.
you want to support them, you can buy merch from them.
What's that old saying? If you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So it's always just good to have it like that.
Right.
But yeah. Do you have anything else you want to, any other ideas on this topic that we haven't discussed?
I believe VR is the future of the online space medium, for sure. I think the old stationary desktop with the monitor is, well, it's always gonna be what it is, and there's gonna be innovations, and as computer hardware gets better and as the size of the thing gets smaller, things are gonna be cooler and cooler, but no, the future is definitely in some kind of augmented or virtual space, reality space. But the end user interface, like the actual, like equipable hardware, has to reach a level of sophistication that is so close to being native that it's how do I put this? It's an unfair demand to make, but it is. You talked earlier in this podcast about this sort of seamless line where suddenly it gripped your attention. Once VR hits that threshold, and it's a problem of computing, it's a problem of economics, and it's a problem of actual like ergonomics, like design, like really creative people. But once it hits that seamless thing that school kids can't wait to get home and put on their VR headset instead of flipping on the PlayStation 5. Once you hit that, VR is off to the races.
Yeah, it might.
And anyone who likes money would get in on the ground floor on this, because it's gonna take people by surprise overnight, just like AI.
We did have that sort of very real moment with AI.
Yeah, ChatGPT came online, and all of a sudden everyone was just like, oh, who saw this coming besides everyone ever, right? Suddenly teachers were like, well, how was we to know? It's like, have you been, like, this stuff has been cooking for a long time. Like, when did you think it was going to happen? 2060?
Right.
So, I would just urge everyone who cares about VR, you're on the right path, you're doing it right, keep
I also do think that the potential is going to sort of become a bit more obvious, at least now with the Apple thing, and it's going to be interesting to see see whatever is going to happen.
Yeah, having a TV in your living room is kind of meme, because it's a big black thing that just stands there and takes up space and dust until you turn it on, and then it's fun. But if you have your TV on your VR headset, suddenly your living room is way more feng shui.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about it. Just running this thing on virtual desktop, and you have a big screen. It's like this. It's not too far away from actually working.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to check
Also,
it out.
also you can go to the toilet and take your TV with you, because it's just in your screen.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. All right, but thanks for
Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for having me on.
Hanging on. And I should just mention again, we are having a book club, so we are reading this. You can join in the Alt VR Discord. You will find an invitation in the comments, as well as the description below, if you would like to actually, just get to talk to more people that are interested in these kind of questions in general. And so thanks for watching, and
you can find me at Unitary Designation on YouTube.
That's right, and he has a lot of
videos about
kind of
subjects.
this kind of content, really.
For sure.
Talking,
Right.
sort of the more slower version of actually just going into reflection.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the intellectual subject.
Yeah,
For sure. Doing a lot of the legwork for the
Yes.
not very fancy yet, but we'll see what happens.
Unitary Designation. You can also find that in the description below. So, thanks, and we'll see you around.
Peace.
Right.
All right. Good times.